Are you interested in magic and using it for combat? Do you fancy the idea of blasting your enemies with heavy-hitting spells? Perhaps you'd like to use your mastery over elements to exploit their weaknesses to strike them where it hurts. If learning the way of wizardry and mastering the arcane art sounds fascinating, magicians could be the right choice for you. Hey, what is up guys, it's Emenalus and welcome back to another video. Magicians are vastly different from the other jobs that Flyff universe has to offer due to their focus on using spells rather than depending on basic attacks. I personally never been all that close with magicians due to how spam intensive they can get because of that, but that's just me. If you aren't that bothered with extra tapping and embracing your inner giraffe though, it's a small price to pay for spells with high damage and the unmatched versatility with elements that magicians possess. Magicians are the fourth and the last job guide that I will be covering on my channel, and considering you guys have been asking for a magician guide for quite a while, I'm really sorry for all the waiting you had to go through. I wanted to address the most popular demand first, however, as that would leave the least people waiting for their desired guide. Thanks to all of you for your comments and patience though, as I wouldn't be nearly as motivated to get this done without all of your love and support. As always, I won't be going through any specific stat builds when it comes to making a good magician, as there's many different variables that come into play when considering what your character should get. Character building is a highly subjective matter, and what one wants from their character varies from person to person, and how much you can afford in terms of gearing can play a huge role in what you actually need. Instead, I will be covering what each stat for a magician does and let you decide yourself what you want to invest your points on. That way you'll have a much better bearing of what you're actually doing, and the process of building the character the way you like is much more entertaining than checking up on a guide as to what you should upgrade next. I believe that for every conclusion there has to be an explanation, and that's what my guides are all about. But with all of that out of the way, let's put on our giraffe hats and get right into it. Magicians are spellcasters that use wands and staves as a conduit for projecting their spells. Wands can be worn along with a shield for extra protection, and using auto attacks conjures a magical bolt that can be charged by holding down left click or your attack button. Staves on the other hand are two-handed weapons that cannot hold a shield, but they usually have more stats than wands by themselves do. Instead of casting magical bolts, their auto attack consists of them wildly smacking enemies with their staff, probably fueled by their imagination and thinking that they could be a giraffe. Whatever the case might be, it definitely isn't as effective as just casting spells instead. The importance of what weapon you're using is quite minimal though, as magicians don't typically rely on auto attacks, and using one or the other doesn't restrict you from using any of your spells. Magicians are the most vulnerable out of all the 4 jobs in Flyff universe, but they're also the most suitable for being called class cannons. With their ability to attack from afar and burst their enemies down quickly with a barrage of spells, they don't often get exposed to much danger either. Double that up with using an element that an enemy is particularly weak against, and they'll be turned into dust in a flash. Unless you made a giraffe angry. My advice, you should probably run. Magicians, unlike any other job, are capable of harnessing all 5 elements that the game has to offer, making them incredibly malleable for any sort of encounter, assuming that they have learned a spell from that school of magic. While it might take a while before you reach complete elemental mastery, just having the choice of what you want to focus on first makes magicians a convenient job to choose. Magicians can graduate to either become Elementors, staff-wielding masters of elements who can enhance their elemental damage to the point of laying waste to a large area of enemies, taking full advantage of their weaknesses and dealing heavy damage, or Psykeepers, psychic masters that abandon their principles of elemental affinity to conjure blasts of raw energy, dealing devastating damage regardless of who or what they're up against. If you wish to learn more about these advanced jobs, I'll be introducing them towards the end of the video, so be sure to stick around if you'd like to learn more. On top of being glass cannons, magicians are equally as blessed with having the most options for skills, with all of them being relatively useful, making them probably the messiest job to go for unless you have a clear vision of what you aim to do. Not to worry though, giving you some insight for what you should do is what I'm here for. Magician's skill tree starts with the basic non-elemental mental strike spell that you can learn right away. The skill tree then splits into 5 directions, each one representing a unique element that they can learn, along with a spell called Blink Pull on the side that you can learn later as a means of short distance teleportation if you'd like. The spells generally are 3 different tiers of offensive magic, with the next one being stronger than the other, with the exception of rooting in the middle of the earth magic branch, which allows you to root an enemy in place for a period of time, which is useful if you want to avoid damage by keeping your enemy at a distance. Giraffes are known to not give a damn though. Certain spells might also have some additional status effects such as damage over time, slowing, or even stunning, which might be worth checking out if you're interested. A very disappointing thing that you should know about magicians though is that unlike other jobs in the game, they aren't able to use any area damaging abilities until their advanced jobs come around. Luckily, Magician's strong damage early on makes even 1v1 relatively quick, compensating for the long wait before you get any. As a general rule of thumb, it's a good idea to not try and focus on too many spells at once, but rather specialize on one at a time and use it until you can max out another one, preferably something further down the spellbook for some extra damage. The scarcity of skill points makes it impossible to learn everything, and having one strong spell will take you much further, much faster than learning a bunch of weak ones ever will. So make your choice well, and work with what you have. With the basics out of the way though, let's move on to talk about stats. Unlike the messy skill tree that magicians have, building stats with them is actually relatively simple. Contrary to other classes that go for 1v1, magicians don't go through the struggles of managing multiple stats to make sure that their attacks strike hard and land their marks. Skills in Flyff aren't designed to never miss, meaning that any hit rate that you might or might not have is completely irrelevant, and instead of attack speed you will be using casting speed, which can't really be obtained through any other means than buffs and gear. What that leaves is pretty much the basic stuff, which you can decide upon yourself. Strength is a pretty useless stat for magicians. The only thing that they'll really be useful for is increasing the damage that you do with Stave's auto attacks, but I don't see a reason why you would want that unless you were a crazy giraffe like me. Stamina is a defensive stat that increases your HP, defense and FP, along with the regeneration rate of HP and FP. FP is useless for magicians, but if you wish to be a little more robust, you might be interested in some extra HP and defense. Dexterity is a generally versatile stat, but mainly serves a defensive purpose for magicians by increasing your parry and block rates. I find this not to be as useful and reliable as stamina, but you can make your own choice regarding that. Intellect is the main source of power for magicians. It increases their MP regeneration, and the amount of damage that they do with their spells and one auto attacks. If it's pure damage that you seek, which I do highly recommend, you'll want to build as much intellect as you can. What I usually do with magicians is that I generally just build intellect and maybe consider other stats if it comes down to that, but do follow your own heart if you feel like you want a little bit of stats elsewhere. The important thing is that you enjoy the game, rather than maximizing your damage. If you're also concerned about potential transition to area attacks as you switch jobs, don't worry, as you can rearrange your stat points upon job change at level 60. So feel free to play your magician just the way you want. As magicians come with more spells to learn that they actually have the points for, the choice of what spell to go for can be incredibly tough. As I mentioned before, it's important to specialize on a certain path as a magician rather than learning everything, as one strong spell will usually come in more handy than just a bunch of spells which deal subpar damage. With that being said, there is a couple ways you could go about this. The first option is to focus on consistency over everything at first and just max out Mental Strike as soon as you reach level 15. Despite its simplicity and being the very first spell that you can learn, Mental Strike actually packs quite a punch and will certainly do its job even up to level 40, which is when you can learn just about any third tier spell of your choosing. As Mental Strike is an elemental, it's actually equally as good against just about any enemy you're up against, making it a strong choice for anyone who wants to have a more steady approach and, for example, would like to go through every monster out there to collect quest items without having to buy any. It also doesn't leave you hanging in case a quest demands you to take down an enemy which just happens to be a strong counter for your chosen element. That's never fun, and neither is a hostile giraffe. Another alternative to starting a magician is picking one of the first tier elemental spells that becomes available as soon as you reach level 18 and taking advantage of their strengths. On top of having an innate element to it, most spells have an additional effect like damage over time or crowd control, making them substantially better than just going with the plain and simple Mental Strike. As often is said though, with higher rewards also comes higher risks. Take it from an apex predator. You will need to reach level 18 in the first place, which means that you'll be using Mental Strike at its minimum required level before that. This isn't completely necessary, but the more points you save, the more points you can save for future spells, which I think takes more importance than a slow start. But well, that's up to you. Another thing that you'll need to keep in mind is that when dealing with elements, you should also know what elements work the best against one another and actively seek foes that are weak against yours, as elements in Flyff universe are quite relevant. Without choosing your enemies carefully, you might not be tapping to the full potential of the spells you're using, or even worse, doing much less damage than it normally would. Simply put, you should use fire against wind, wind against earth, earth against electric, electric against water, and water against fire. I recommend using the monster view function of your map that I've taught before to see what elements all the foes you'll be up against have, and decide based on that what element is worth learning the most. In general, you'll want an element that has pretty even jumps so your damage won't suffer too much and that you won't be risking yourself against anything too tough. It's a lot to take in, but this much is quite necessary if you wish to go down the path of a magician. Regardless of which path you end up starting with, elements will become an important aspect of your gameplay eventually as you move on to better spells. Even more so if you wish to become an Elementor when choosing your advanced job becomes timely. If you wish to learn more about elements in general and how they work in practice, I highly recommend checking out the guide that I made for elements earlier, as it's a pretty large topic by itself, and integrating all of that here would just be me repeating myself. There's a lot of deep diving into certain mechanics which you might not be aware of, so give it a watch if you want to understand them a little better. What you'll want to pay attention to as a magician is what you're wearing. Because magicians are spellcasters in nature, their priority of things they should focus on is much different than for a regular 1v1 job. One thing you definitely need to do is always make sure you're stocked up on refreshers, or MP potions as a more common term. Magician spellcasting consumes MP pretty quickly, and even with their large pool of MP, they will eventually run out. Running out of MP mid-combat is pretty much the same as not bringing sufficient tribute to a mighty giraffe, which in both cases will end up with an unconscious guy laying on the ground. So make sure to always check up on your refreshers when visiting town so you won't be running out. Moving forward to the actual gear you'll be wearing, there are a few stats that you should focus on. Special wands and staves typically come with stats like element mastery bonuses, intellect, casting speed, and increased HP or MP. While HP and MP are more situational and not always necessary, the former are certain to help those who want to stack up on damage. You might also come across weapons with bonuses that increase the damage of a certain skill, so keeping your eyes on one that boosts the power of the spells you're using is a great idea. A good weapon bonus won't find a replacement anytime soon. You can find out more about this on my upgrading video if you're interested. Going over the other good stats though, Element Mastery of course increases the strength of the specified school of magic, increasing their damage by a percentage. This is a great stat to have if you specialize in the same type of magic that the mastery stat provides. Casting speed, as the name suggests, will accelerate the speed at which you're casting your spells, effectively increasing the damage that you'll be doing. Casting speed comes at varying amounts across all magician sets, but bigger isn't always necessarily better, as they might come with other stats as a trade-off. There even are some weapons that might come with some, but this isn't always the case. I highly suggest using Flyffipedia.com's item catalog to coordinate what kind of equipment you want to aim for, as there might be items that you'll want to get a hold onto and keep for a while longer than just 15 levels. After all, building your character just the way you like is one of the greatest joys of life. If you want to make your magician the most effective in terms of firepower, it is a good idea to stock up on as much casting speed, intellect, and elemental mastery if applicable as possible, potentially with a corresponding weapon bonus on top. This way you'll secure the best possible results out of your magician, but of course do take into account whether the specific build you're going for would do with more HP or other stats. Going with an AoE build around your second job would be a great example of where you might want to consider some extra HP, especially if you're prone to getting hit or chased down by an agitated beast. The final decision will be up to you. But well, everything can be just fun on games only for so long. Magicians are a very strong job, especially early on, and they keep up incredibly well quite late into their second jobs, but the sad truth to magicians is that they actually don't hold up that well when nearing endgame. As critical damage becomes a prominent feature at later levels, somewhere around hundreds, magicians start to fall inferior to their peers and sink to the bottom of the damage charts. This is because critical damage isn't actually accounted for with skills, and this also includes spells, making them not be able to take advantage of the same kind of scaling that other classes do. Fortunately, this concern is mostly directed towards players seeking to focus on 1v1 damage, as other classes who also opt in for AoE, of course suffer from the same handicap that magicians do. On top of that, magicians have the advantage of not having to build themselves to be tanky, making them generally superior at AoE, as they don't have to sacrifice their points for survivability. The point that I want to make is that if you do decide to make yourself a magician, you should go into it with the mentality that you're going to focus on AoE above all else. But if it's a character with strong 1v1 that you want, I recommend that you go for some other job than a magician. If this doesn't discourage you from continuing the path of wizardry, let's move on to talk about the advanced paths that you can take. Elementors are the advanced path for magicians that want to take full advantage of elemental mastery to exploit and overpower whatever they're up against using staves. Elementors have access to advanced combat spells that are vastly superior to the elementary magician spells, on top of being able to cast area damaging spells for each element there is. Elementors are also capable of enhancing the power of their chosen element, temporarily allowing them to do extra damage with the corresponding school of magic. Needless to say, Elementors have a very extensive skill set and in fact have the most to choose from across all advanced jobs available. Distributing your skill points early on as an Elementor is important since you won't have the points necessary to max out everything possible in a long time. But there are some strong picks that will take you a long way. Windfield, as the name suggests, is a wind elemental AoE spell that you can learn once you reach level 65. As this spell also has a pretty high chance of slowing down monsters, it is a staple pick for just about any Elementor who wants to level without the help of a tank. Of course, it's a great idea to max out Wind Master while you're at it to make the most out of the spell. Elementors are another example of a job that takes advantage of hit and run combat, or HNR for short, allowing them to take groups of monsters down without having to get close and personal. This makes it possible to focus more on damage to make farming quicker and effective, without having to sacrifice any of their damage for survivability. But whether you'd rather have extra health or stamina just in case is your choice to make. Overall, Elementors are a great versatile pick suitable for many occasions and one of the most effective paths to take if you want to get into AoE farming. And of course, with their complete elemental control, they are an invaluable asset in groups and dungeons. Psykeepers are the alternative path for those magicians who wish to pursue a more mystical route of magic and specialize in the use of psychic powers while wearing wands. While Psykeepers leave behind everything that they know about elements, they make up for that with the sheer firepower that the blast of pure magical energy has. Regardless of what they're up against, their attacks pack such a punch that any concern about elemental affinity remains a secondary concern. On top of that, Psykeepers are masters of manipulation, able to debilitate and control their enemies in various ways. With the help of Satanology and Psychic Wall, they're sure to keep their enemy where they belong, a distance away from them. And in case all else fails, Psykeepers are also capable of reflecting the damage that they take back to their opponents, potentially even more than what the enemy itself dealt. Psykeepers are pretty much the definition of burst damage in 1v1 especially early on, but that isn't the only thing they're capable of. They are also able to deal with groups of enemies in more ways than one, either by taking advantage of their damage reflection and taking them on up close for stacked damage, or also adopting the hit and run tactic later on through ranged area damage spells, although with a little less control than Elementors. Whatever your desire might be, Psykeepers come equipped with the best of both worlds, making them a balanced and reliable pick. And if worrying about elements and every encounter that you might come across isn't your kind of thing, they're provided with the consistency to leave that worry behind. That pretty much wraps up everything that I have to say about magicians. I hope that everything that I covered in the video was enough to help you decide whether you want to take the path of a magician and gave you all the necessary resources to understand how to play one. Huge thanks for taking your time to watch the guide. If you liked it, feel free to show your support by dropping a like, leaving a comment, or maybe even subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this. Be sure to also share this with anyone else aspiring to become a magician, as the information could be equally as handy to anybody else who's just starting out. With the release of this guide, I have now gone through every job that Flyff universe has to offer, and in case you're curious about how the other jobs in the game are like, you can find the guides to the rest of them in my channel and guide playlist. Feel free to explore your opportunities, and I hope that the material I've spent love and care to create will tremendously help with making the right choice for you. And of course, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment or consider joining my community server where we can communicate directly. Just don't expect an answer when I'm sleeping. The automatic response you'll be getting is that you're right behind your window. Consider checking out my Twitch channel as well if you'd like to catch me whenever I'm live, drop in to say hi, and have a great time whenever I'm up to no good, either in Flyff universe or perhaps in another game. You can also check my Twitter if you'd like to see what I'm up to every now and then, both in Flyff and elsewhere. You can find all of those and the links to the Flyff Universe's official Discord server and Flyffipedia in case you're interested in exploring those as well in the description below. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope to see you next time when I'm uploading or streaming, whichever floats your boat. But until then, it's bye bye.